Dubuque and the Great War, a presentation by Milton Padway. The focus of my paper has been how the state of Iowa, and more specifically Dubuque, limited their citizens' rights during World War I. Naturally, one of the main aspects of my paper is explaining how the Iowa government was able to make their citizens complicit with such outright attack on their rights as citizens of the United States. One of the main documents that I use is the Babel Proclamation, which is currently up on the screen. It serves as a great sort of base for where I start the paper, as just for general in Iowa, not really specific to Dubuque, though many Dubuque parts of the city were deeply affected by the Babel Proclamation in itself. One specific instance that I use to describe how the Babel Proclamation affected citizens of Dubuque is incorporating the St. Mary's Church, which I know has been done a lot. It's kind of beating a dead horse at this point, but I do bring up how the one of the pastors stood up during a German prayer at one point and told them all to, stop saying that German prayer and change it to English. But there's some other stories, some other interesting stories come out of St. Mary's Parish as well. One of those interesting stories that is alternative to the pastor one is actually about this picture that we see. It's of a stained glass window that was made in Bavaria and imported to Dubuque to the St. Mary's Church in 1915, prior to the Babel Proclamation coming in, actually prior to the U.S. involvement in World War I. But it didn't stop a lot of the citizens of the St. Mary's Church to have a problem with the glassware being imported from Germany. There's actually a little bit of division that happened throughout the church between the German and non-German members. It was very interesting. They eventually got there, and the fuss kind of ended. It was just mainly based around moral principles, I guess, is what one man argued. What this illustrates is that the ethnic groups in America prior to World War I and the U.S.'s involvement, I guess, in it, uh, felt that they were kind of fragmented, and the English Americans supported England and the Allies, whereas German Americans in general, not always the case, supported the Central Powers and Germany more specifically, and which really shows like the deep-rooted ethnic biases towards each other. A prime example of this is actually from The Fatherland, the newspaper or magazine that we kind of read a little bit through towards the beginning of the year. It just kind of shows prior to U.S. involvement and illustrates how the German community kind of rallied behind its own cause and how, up until the U.S. entered on the side of the Ally, it really was a question of what side should the U.S. enter when it inevitably has to get involved, which I find very interesting. The next part that my paper kind of hits on is kind of more local, pertaining to Dubuque in itself. So I focus on the Dubuque Telegraph Herald, a local newspaper in the area, and I just kind of get its perspectives on what's going on in the war, more associated closely with like what's going on prior to the U.S. entering the war, as well as after the U.S. enters the war, and specifically when the Babel Proclamation comes into play. It's very interesting what I found. This picture is actually a picture of people working on newspapers in the Telegraph Herald. Just kind of found it interesting. I found it on the Loras College archive. Great resource. Some other aspects that my paper kind of goes into detail with is going through the Metcalf papers. I spent a lot of time going through those boxes and figuring out what I could use for my paper. So I found some specific things to Dubuque which really helped out. Just talking about ways in which the government could essentially limit the rights of the citizens of Dubuque, more specifically the German citizens of Dubuque. So in conclusion to what I kind of found was what you'd expect. I mean, the government clearly overstepped its boundaries and did very unconstitutional things in regulating the rights of what the citizens had, such as freedom of speech. But I saw that it was also took a lot of complicitness by the citizens of Iowa. I mean, they could have done things to reacted to this, but they didn't. It was very interesting. So yeah, thank you guys, and have a good rest of your semester, and go Hawks.